Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. I'm Reverend Jim Keat, the Director of Online Innovation at Convergence, and I am joined by the Reverend Dr. Caleb J. Lines. Caleb is the Senior Minister of University Christian Church in San Diego, California, where it's a whole lot warmer than it is here in Michigan. He's the Co-Executive Director of ProgressiveChristianity.org and the co-host for the Moonshine Jesus Show. Couple questions. Do you drink while you're recording that podcast?
Yes.
Okay, good. The name implies it. And what does the J stand for in Caleb J. Lines?
It stands for Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
So Caleb
okay.
Jeffrey Lines. Yes. Not only, and I've got to say, not only do we drink in the Moonshine Jesus Show, but
okay.
So this is a pop culture podcast that examines theology and politics and mainly sci-fi, fantasy, superhero genre stuff. But we also drink themed cocktails every week.
Ooh.
And so it's kind of a fun thing with my co-host Mark Sandlin and I. We like to come up with creative cocktails and it really loosens the theological lips, so to speak, as we talk about all of the good stuff in pop culture and theology.
I feel like that podcast is just an excuse for you and Mark to come up with cocktails. That's all it is.
Well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And an excuse to watch stuff that we're already very passionate about. So yes, It's a lot of fun. Moonshine Jesus Show.
Well, this conversation, maybe we'll have another one just talking about that stuff, but we're talking about this. You have a book, because in addition to all those things mentioned, including middle name Jeffrey, you are the author of Awakened, a 52-week Progressive Christian Devotional. Congratulations! This thing exists.
Thank you.
It's like physical paper.
It's real. It's there. Yeah. You've got a copy. Yes, it's exciting to see that in the hands of someone. So thank you for getting that, Jim.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about your book, because when you write a book, then you talk about your book, and then people go read the book. You should all go read the book. We'll get to that in a second. You say right in the introduction, we're just going right in. I'm just quoting things I underlined and everything. Progressive Christianity is about being open to new and ancient ideas and experiences that expand our faith. Then you have the whole introduction. You talk about progressive Christianity. Say a bit more about what progressive Christianity is and what it means to be a progressive Christian.
Yeah, so I think that this is really important because Jesus spent most of his ministry talking about the creation of the reign of God on earth. And when he said that, he was casting a vision for the future in which peace reigned and justice permeated our society. So a lot of people think that the reign of God is about something otherworldly. It's not. It's about a vision for the future here and now. And so Christians ought to be all about progressing towards that goal, making progress towards that goal. And I think if we're authentically following Jesus, then that's what we're doing. Progressive Christianity is really about that, making progress towards the reign of God. And so I think that progressive Christianity is really just Christianity. It's just that the prominent voice in our society has been the religious right, and they have so co-opted the conversation that we have to distinguish what is authentic, regular, real Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, from all of that junk that is out in our society. Because most people, when they think of Christianity now, they think of that kind of narrative. That mainline Protestantism is no longer a dominant narrative in the United States. And so I think that most of this stuff is just stuff that mainline Protestants have been teaching for decades. And so a lot of times when I hear people talk about, they're deconstructing and they're trying to reconstruct faith, I'm like, what you're searching for is what we've been talking about in mainline Protestantism, what most Christians in the United States used to believe. So progressive Christianity, my opinion, really just Christianity.
Yeah. I like to think of those things as like, if I were to say, I'm a vegetarian who doesn't eat meat. It's redundant. It's the same thing twice.
It's the same thing.
You just say it once. Yeah. Christianity, if it's not progressive, is it really Christianity? I don't think so. It's something, but it's not Christianity.
Certainly, if we're talking about the narrative of Christianity in the United States, it's not
Yes.
progressive, it is regressive Christianity.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is counter to everything that Jesus spent his life in ministry teaching and doing.
Yeah.
That we have to be making the world better, or else why are we doing this? Why are we trying
Yeah.
to follow Jesus? If we want to make life worse for people, then what's the value of Christianity? So yes, making progress towards the reign of God.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on all of that. So you break down the book, 52 weeks, nicely fitting into the course of a year, and I even noticed how they seem to line up, where like the section on LGBTQ plus affirmation probably lands somewhere around June if you begin this in the beginning of the year, and
Right.
Christmas comes in the final 4 weeks of the year, so there was obviously some like, where are these going to fit on a typical calendar?
Right.
Now, you can read this book starting anywhere. You don't have to start, January 1, but it's nice to know they kind of is in alignment with seasons in the world around us. But of these 13, so renewal, diversity, biblical women, eco-spirituality, mental health, LGBTQ plus affirmation, reign of God, questioning, faith and science, embracing change, rethinking beliefs, gratitude, and Christmas. Tell me about that list. How did you get there? What was it like kind of coming up with the way you structured this? What got left out? You're like, oh, I didn't have room for science fiction theology, or whatever the thing, Broadway theology. I've seen your sermon. How did you get to these 13? How did you kind of process this? What did we miss? What's in the sequel coming out sometime? What do we got left?
Well, the way I decided on these particular themes is that I let the core values of progressive Christianity guide the overall overarching themes of the book. And so at progressivechristianity.org, we have what we used to call the 8 points of progressive Christianity, and we now call core values of progressive Christianity. And those core values are about things that really, I think it is just inherent in being a Christian. So things like believing that following the way and teachings of Jesus can lead to experiencing the sacredness, wholeness, unity of all life, even while recognizing the Spirit moves in beneficial ways in other traditions. And so that's the first core value. That is something that I tried to tie into all of these themes, like recognizing where we can pull from other religious traditions. But that's something that is left out. Like there's not a section on other religious traditions. Seek community that's inclusive of all people, honoring differences in theological perspective, age, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, class, and ability. So obviously sexual orientation, gender identity is a theme that is included, but not all of those points of diversity are included. Strive for peace and justice among all people, knowing that behaving with compassion and selfless love towards one another is fullest expression of what we believe. And so peace and justice is a prominent theme in this devotional because one of the purposes of the devotional was to incorporate intellectual honesty and social justice and spiritual practice, embrace the insights in contemporary science, and strive to protect the earth and ensure its integrity and sustainability. And so that piece actually both of those components are in there, eco-spirituality and science, and commit to a path of lifelong learning, believing that the value is more in questioning than the absolutes. And certainly lifelong learning and intellectual honesty is a part of all this. But in terms of the actual themes that I chose, I did try to tie them to different points of the year. So like, for instance, mental health is May, Mental Health Awareness Month. But I also chose things that I thought were often impediments for people really engaging deeply in spirituality. So, for instance, the two most common reasons given for people leaving institutional religion are perceived stances on climate change by the church, namely that the church doesn't care that there is an ecological crisis, or even more to the point, that sometimes the earth causes the ecological crisis, hoping for the eschaton to come sooner, that Jesus will come riding back in on the clouds if we make the earth bad enough, uninhabitable enough. And so that's one issue. The other issue that's most commonly given for people leaving the church is the perceived stance on LGBTQ plus issues, primarily that the church does not want anything to do with LGBTQ plus folks, that the church condemns queer folks, and that certainly that is not the stance of, I think, most Christians, actually. And so Whenever I'm talking to churches, I always say, if you can be loud about two issues, be loud
Mm,
about those two issues, because those are issues that are impediments to people. And so
yeah.
one of the goals with this book was to help people maybe who aren't a part of a traditional congregation think about spirituality in a different way and think about how they can engage with spirituality. And so one of the reasons that I wrote this book is through my work with progressivechristianity.org. People will often message me and say, "Hey, where can I find a progressive Christian devotional?" And I have to think about that. And I've really racked my brain to find one that is kind of a weekly devotional that has, scripture lessons, has reflection, has spiritual practices, has discussion questions. And so one of the impetuses for me to write this was simply that people were wanting this, and I couldn't think of a place where it existed. Certainly, there are email listservs that you can sign up for, and you can get some spiritual reflection, but not many resources like this. There are a lot of evangelical fundamentalist kind of resources like this, but not a lot of progressive Christian devotionals where you don't have to sit through and kind of pick and throw away the theology as you're reading it. So those were some of the guiding principles.
And I love the way, like you describe the people who are disenfranchised, or just the tension that people face within the version of Christianity they're given. And if someone is in that, like, well, this just doesn't work for me, I guess I'm just going to jump ship completely. First off, nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need to just jump out of the ship and discover there's lots of great water to keep swimming in. But some people just wish they could stay in this boat of Christianity. You just need to find, a different vessel. I think your book is a good introduction of what this whole world of progressive Christianity is, and maybe for people to realize, you're not the only one thinking these things, asking these things, finding these frustrations. So I think there's just a lot of empathy in this book that someone can experience of like, oh, I am allowed to ask these questions. I'm allowed to think these things and feel these things and be these things, and I can still be a person of faith. I can still call myself a Christian with all these things. So there's like a little pastoral care snuck in here as well, I think.
It is. And if I can tell you a quick story, I was meeting with college students talking about this book not too long ago. And one of the college students, probably 20 years old, said, if I had had this book as I was growing up, I would have stayed a Christian. Because it allows me to think about the things that I've always thought. It affirms the things that I've always thought. It's the institutional church that was telling me that I can't be who I am, that I can't think the things that I think. And so I think that I hope that this is affirmation that it is pastoral care for people who find themselves in those situations as well.
Oh, I love it. I love it. All right, I want to look at a few of the specific weeks that you talk about in here, just because I think they're all great, all 52, but a few, some we've already kind of referenced, but just want to hear a bit more from you on them. In the Echo Spirituality one, week 13, you have a chapter titled Original Blessing. So say a bit about what difference this starting point makes. Original blessing, as opposed to that, often misunderstood, misinterpreted, even used doctrine of original sin. Talk about why this starting point, and even in the chapter of Echo Spirituality, is essential.
Sure. So original sin is terrible theology. And I often will tell people two things. One, that if they went up to Jesus hanging on the cross and they said, Jesus, thank you for dying for our sins that we have inherited from Adam. We are so grateful for you ensuring our eternal salvation, that Jesus would have had no idea what they were talking about, because that doctrine had not even been invented yet when Jesus was crucified. That original sin is a notion that was invented by Augustine several hundred years after Jesus. So if we are looking to Jesus as our primary teacher, then I don't think that that's great theology for us to latch on. In fact, I think it's an extremely harmful theology that has created all kinds of problems. And fundamentally people viewing themselves as not worthy. So original blessing is different, and I'm building upon the work here of Matthew Fox and others who kind of invented this concept, but it is looking at the first creation story as God creates all of these things in the universe, creates the earth and everything within it, and after each thing names it as good, including naming human beings as fundamentally good, claiming human beings as fundamentally good. And if we begin with that outlook, that we are all blessed by God, that we are all claimed by God, that we are all fundamentally good, well, that changes the way that we view ourselves and view life. That we are not inherently marred with the sin that we can't get rid of, but instead that we are children of God, that we are reflections of God with inherent worth and dignity. And so beginning from that place with ourselves changes the way that we interact with others, the way that we view ourselves, our own self-worth, but also changes the way we look at the world in which we live. That if we look around and we say that this world is a gift from God, that God has claimed as good, then we are not wanting to hasten the eschaton. We are not wanting to see this world washed away, but instead we are seeing each day, each moment, each experience in this world as a gift from God. And so I love the idea of original blessing, one, because I think it's better theology. I think it's more authentic to the teachings of the text, and I think it is a better way of interacting with the world for all of us. So original blessing to me felt like a good place to start in thinking about eco-spirituality.
I'm with you completely. Good shout out to Matthew Fox. Just to clarify, we're not talking about the actor from the TV show Lost. That's a different Matthew Fox.
Yes, that's pop culture, but a little bit outside my world. You know, like everyone knows Matthew Fox, right? The theology, no, maybe not.
Yeah,
but his theology is very significant, and certainly he's been a great partner for us at progressivechristianity.org as well.
I always think of the shift of viewing the Bible and just self and the world through the lens of original blessing as literally that, a lens. Like if you have, glasses with a pink tint on them, after a while you're going to forget that your brain's going to forget the tint is there, but everything has a pink hue to it just because of the lens you're using to see everything. And for so long, Christians have been given this lens of original sin, and we just can't help but see ourselves and the world and everything through that lens. Like, wait, no. Someone put that on you. That wasn't there to begin with. Augustine, forced those into our faces. What if there was another way to look at things, and suddenly the world is a whole different spectrum of color? Oh, we need that, I think, more and more and more. Love that that's there. Love that that's there. Okay, well, that was barely controversial. Then, a few weeks later, on week 42, people, you say this. I'm agnostic about the idea of an afterlife. What? Okay, hold on. Then you go on further. Here's the quote I really like. People often ask me, what happens to evil people in the world when they die if there's no hell? Okay. Hitler, for example. Honestly, we don't know, but wishing them eternal punishment isn't the Christian response. While there are certain things that we as human beings may not be able to forgive, wishing someone suffering and pain is never the response that Jesus taught us. Let's be concerned about this life and let God take care of the rest. Okay, I just want to know, when did hell kind of lose its place in your theological doctrine trading card deck? How did that kind of make its way? I'm assuming at some point you were taught about hell and you're like, yeah, that's a thing. And then now at some point now it's like, well, maybe it's not quite the same thing. Give us just kind of how did that come to be where you're sitting today?
Sure. So I actually grew up in a progressive congregation in rural Missouri. And oddly enough, even in rural Missouri, there were progressive congregations. And so I did not grow up hearing about hell. That was not a belief of our church, other than the fact that I was in rural Missouri, and so it was also kind of in the water. And so
I thought you were going to say, other than it was rural Missouri, so it was also kind of hell.
So it was also kind of hell. Yeah, it was, especially in the summer. Not only the culture there, but also the climate.
The weather.
It was hot and muggy. Yes. So, so I don't think that that was ever something necessarily
Mm,
that informed the way that I thought about the world. I don't remember a time when I was ever real scared of eternal punishment. And I think that that's one of the things that relates to what we were talking about earlier, progressive Christianity just being Christianity, because Jesus didn't teach about hell either. And this is one of the things that really confounds me about the way that we think about Christianity in 21st century America is that we've got a lot of dogma that doesn't come from the Bible and doesn't come from Jesus in particular. And so, for instance, Jesus talks about Gehenna, which is translated into English as hell, but Gehenna was not this place of eternal punishment. Gehenna was a literal place outside the walls of Jerusalem that was often associated with pagan child sacrifice and was thought to be this place that was distant from God. And so Jesus was using this mental image that people in his society would have had to talk about distance from God. And primarily, when we go through and we read those verses, we see that he's talking about a world in which we don't follow the teachings that he's teaching us about, the values that he's displaying. If we're not letting peace rule our hearts, if we're not caring for others, if we're not working for justice on behalf of those who are marginalized, then we create a world that is like Gehenna. And so we have just really misunderstood this as a society, and it has led to all kinds of trauma that really can be deconstructed pretty easily when we just actually read the teachings of Jesus and bother to notice what he's talking about. In terms of the afterlife in general, I think that nobody really knows that. And I really relate to Marcus Borg's thoughts on this. He said, "Is there an afterlife? And if so, what will it be like?" I don't have a clue. He said, "But I have faith that the God who has buoyed us in life will buoy us in death. What more that means, I do not know. But it's all I need to know, that we die into God." And so I resonate with that because I think that no matter how confident anyone is, no one really knows what happens to us after we die. But we, I think, have faith that somehow the God, the universe, the divine, whatever it is that connects us all, that when we die, that we die into all of that. And that in some ways, trying to figure out exactly what that looks like is always going to be wrong. And we have no control over that. But what we do have control over is our life here and now. We have control over how we respond to situations right now. And how we respond to situations can create a heaven on earth or a hell on earth, depending on what it is that we do. And I think that that's certainly true in our personal relationships, you know, how we relate to others, but it's true in how we vote and all of that as well, that we make decisions that create heaven or hell. And
yeah.
so I think we should be more concerned with those decisions and less concerned with what's going to happen to our souls in terms of eternal reward or punishment.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As someone who did not grow up in as progressive of a Midwest community as you did, I was given probably not the same total fear tactic, fire insurance version of hell that some of our evangelical cousins might be still wading through. However, early on, before deconstruction was a word used for Christianity, back when Jack Caputo was the only one using it for philosophy, my deconstruction, largely centered and began when I loosened that grasp on the understanding of hell. Like, wait, what if we hold that one a little lighter and understand the context of Gehenna? That helps a lot. And it's like, wait, how much of my theology and spirituality just revolves around this perpetual fear and punishment of the what if someday? And suddenly it's like, oh, wait, I'm free. Now I can rethink all the things. And suddenly it roots me more in the here and now. And there is far too much literal hell on earth. And people are so fixated on a fictitious literal hell in the afterlife. And it's like, no, we're missing out on what's... Yeah, so... Amen and amen and amen. I'm the choir and you are preaching to me. Thank you.
Well, it's real religious trauma too, Jim, as you know, that like I get so many people who come into my church or who reach out online or whatever, who grew up with both fear of hell and fear of a rapture. And so I've got people
Yeah.
in my congregation who talk about waking up in the middle of the night and searching around their house, afraid that
Ooh.
all of their family members had been raptured up and that they had been the only ones left behind. And that's a trauma that stays
Yeah.
with people even after they intellectually stop believing in that there's still some kind of fear there. And so that is tragic. And I think we should be
Yeah.
doing everything that we can to stop religious trauma, because church, when it's at its best, ought to be about helping us feel supported, helping us feel loved, helping us to live better lives and create a better world, not making us fearful and unable to function in our lives because of this overwhelming sense of dread.
Yeah. Whew. Well, I grew up Lutheran, so I sidestepped that rapture theology.
Yeah.
Good old amillennials, but yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you
Okay,
sidestepped that one. Yeah.
Plenty of other traumas to deal with, not alone, dismantling whiteness and patriarchy and maleness that you're stuck with. So anyway, okay. The final chapter of your book, the final week, Christmas, dragons for Christmas. Okay,
Yes.
I loved where this went. There's a Christmas story in Revelation, and it has a dragon. Okay, give us just the what's going on. This is, if nothing else, the clickbait to buy the book to read the last chapter. It's great. What is this dragons for Christmas nonsense?
So I love the book of Revelation to begin with. For a long time, I was of the opinion that the book of Revelation did nothing but cause harm, and it should not be in the biblical canon. And then I revisited the book of Revelation the further I got into ministry, and I really did a lot of this during COVID, whenever, for a lot of us in the developed world who come from places of privilege, that was as close as many of us have come to feeling like the world was falling apart. And so during that time, I spent a lot of time with the book of Revelation, and I recognized, I knew this intellectually, but I recognized, maybe in an emotional sense, a realer sense, that John on the island of Patmos was writing this book as it felt like his world was falling apart. And it wasn't about the end times. It wasn't about predicting when Jesus was going to come riding back in on the clouds. It wasn't about the rapture. What it was about was the world falling apart around him. And I thought, I knew this, but whenever I read this with those lenses, then this book becomes a very rich book. It becomes a very incredibly resourceful book, and it becomes deeply meaningful. And so at Christmas, we all know the story about from Luke, where the Holy Family goes and they look for a place to stay. We know that story. We know then the story in Matthew where the Magi come and visit Jesus, and Jesus becomes a refugee and goes down to Egypt. We know those stories. But most of us don't know the story, the birth narrative that is in the book of Revelation. And I love this story because what John does is he reappropriates a Roman myth about Caesar's family and applies it to Jesus. And so the story goes that there is Apollo, the god of light, is about to be born. And as he's about to be born, there is this great monster that is about ready to swallow up Apollo whole. But at the last minute, Zeus comes in and saves Apollo. And Apollo is the god of light. But more than that, Apollo is said to be the father of the Roman emperor at the time when the book was written. And so John reappropriates that myth, and he's got Mary about ready to give birth to Jesus, and there is a seven-headed red dragon about to devour Jesus. And then Jesus is saved at the last moment. Well, the seven-headed red dragon is Rome. And so that's clear throughout the book of Revelation. If there's any doubt, there's this cosmic battle in the book of Revelation where the dragon is sent down to rule over the city of seven hills, Rome. And so John takes this birth narrative about Caesar's family and says, you have gone from being the ones who were about to be devoured, the ones in danger, to the ones who are devouring my people. And so from the very beginning of Jesus's life, it sets up this contrast between the reign of God and the Roman Empire, between the God whom we know through Jesus versus the God that we hear about in the Roman Empire. And so it's a choice. It's a choice. And I actually think that all of the birth narratives do this in some way, but I think that this one is a really fun example of how the Gospels, about how throughout the New Testament we see this come to fruition, and about how creative New Testament writers had to be under the thumb of the Roman Empire. And
Yeah.
if you look for it, you can see incredibly hopeful messages in unexpected places.
Yeah.
And I think it helps us really understand what the book of Revelation is about. So Dragons for Christmas, I think, has become my favorite Christmas story. I love to read that at Christmas, and everyone just thinks I'm crazy, wanting to read from the book of Revelation at Christmas.
See, I just think this means we all need to get little dragon toys and add them to our nativity sets at Christmas.
Oh, I
if
love
people
that.
if people mash up the magi and the shepherds in their nativities, which is already biblically incorrect, put a dragon in there too.
Put a
It's
dragon.
equally
Why not?
biblical. Yeah, let's have all of them in one crazy mashup of a Christmas story.
Jim, you have given me a new idea for the nativity set this year. We're doing that at church. I'm there. I am getting on the phone after this, and I'm going to make sure that we have a dragon in our nativity set.
Oh, yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay. Lastly, we made it week 52. We just covered the whole book essentially. What impact? We talked about this off and on, but just say it directly. What impact do you hope that this book will have on people and communities of faith?
Well, I hope, one, that it's a resource for people who are looking for a way to ground themselves throughout the year. That this is a progressive way to think about faith and to engage in spiritual practices. And so one of the things that we haven't talked about is that for each theme, I integrate a different spiritual practice. And, Jim, I was of the opinion for a long time that I'm just not really good at spiritual practices because I have a hard time like sitting still and praying, and it's not really my thing. And so I was doing this series at church called Becoming Spiritual, and I was thinking about different ways to engage in spiritual practice. And I had told a member of my congregation, I'm like, I'm not sure I'm really good at spiritual practices. And she said, no, you are. You just engage in different kinds of spiritual practices. And whenever I began to reframe my thought process of what it meant to engage in spirituality, that really opened my eyes. So for instance, seeing a conversation like this one as a spiritual practice, as a prayer for an extrovert like me, was incredible because that's something that I do all the time. That's something that I can understand, that dreaming big dreams, that those are things that I love to do in our spiritual practices. And so throughout this book, I lead people through some different spiritual practices. And so some of them are things like conversations. Some of them are things like journaling or lectio divina or meditation or going out and taking walks and noticing things around you, all kinds of different spiritual practices that I also hope open people's eyes to what is possible, what kind of spiritual practices are possible to sustain us, because different things sustain us. And unless we try those things, we don't necessarily know what will work and won't work. I also hope that this is a resource not just for individuals, but for groups to use. So in my congregation, we're using this in small groups. And so it's been specifically designed to use on your own spiritual journey, but also to spark conversation. Some of these things you need to have conversation about. For instance, an afterlife. Well, if you've grown up with the idea of hell, and this is a brand new concept, maybe this is something that you don't just want to read and sit with by yourself. Maybe you want to have discussions about this. So I hope that this is a tool that really helps people in those kinds of situations as well. And I suppose lastly, I hope that it does help people to think about things in new ways, to see each of these issues that we talk about as spiritual issues, because some of them may be pretty clearly spiritual issues. For instance, the rethinking beliefs, that's all about belief, or about renewal. That's something that a lot of congregations talk about, or a lot of people in their spiritual journeys think about renewal, becoming a new creation, all of those kinds of things. But other stuff like science, maybe that's not something that we've thought about. Or mental health. I mean, churches are doing a better job of trying to break the silence on mental health, but not a great job. And we really need to do a better job of thinking about what the biblical text says, what Jesus's teachings are on mental health. And so I'm also hopeful that some of these things will also help people to think about how their practices, how their lives are inherently spiritual. That maybe there's not as big a separation between the sacred and the profane as we often think. So I hope that people see all life as sacred, and that they use this book as a tool to embrace that realization.
Well, I think it does exactly that. Awakened, a 52-week Progressive Christian Devotional, has a nice little sheep on the front. The other sheep are sleeping. That sheep is awakened. You explained that in the
I love
introduction.
that.
Very nice.
Yeah, wink, wink.
CalebJLines.com is where you can go to find out more about the Reverend Dr. Caleb Jeffrey Lines and all things Caleb, as well as information about the book. You can find it wherever you buy books, whether you buy them from the world's richest capitalist or from other places. Take your pick, buy the book, enjoy the book, and hopefully it is something that is useful for you, your life, your faith community, and your journey through all this. Caleb, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for talking. Write another book. We can do this again then. So just get on that, and then we'll do this again, and the world will be a better place.
I'll get right on that. Thanks for having me, Jim.